Welcome back. Since you're here, the night has probably already settled in. Before the story begins, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. I always find it interesting how many of us end the day together like this. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let tonight's stories begin. When I moved into the apartment in Narima, I told myself the thin walls were a small price to pay for the rent. The building was old but ordinary, 4 floors, beige tiles cracked like dry skin, bicycles lined in uneven rows out front. From my balcony, I could see the Cebu line tracks and, beyond them, a strip of neglected trees that looked almost black at night. The landlord, a soft-spoken man in his 70s, apologized for the building's age. "It's quiet here," he said. "Very quiet." He was right. After the last train passed, the neighborhood seemed to withdraw into itself. Even the convenience store at the corner felt subdued, its fluorescent lights humming over empty aisles. For the first week, I slept well. Then I began waking before dawn with the uneasy sense that something in the room had shifted. My studio was too small to hide anything. Bed against the wall, low table, kitchenette, sliding closet door. Yet my eyes would drift toward the Genkan, as if expecting someone to be standing there. There was never anyone. I blamed stress. I had transferred offices, and the commute was longer. My coworkers were polite but distant. During lunch, they scrolled through their phones, laughing softly at things they didn't share. I started eating at my desk. One evening, while taking out the trash, I found a thin white envelope in my mailbox. No stamp, no address, just my apartment number written in pencil. Inside was a photograph. It showed the front of our building, taken from across the tracks. My balcony was visible on the 3rd floor. The curtains were parted. I told myself it was a prank. I slipped the photograph into a drawer and tried to forget it. 2 nights later, I woke again before dawn. I was certain I had heard something, not sharp, just a faint movement, like fabric shifting. The refrigerator's motor cycled on. Pipes murmured in the walls. The closet door was open by a few centimeters. I always closed it before sleeping. I lay still, staring at the narrow darkness between the door and its frame. Instead of getting up, I reached for my phone and turned on the flashlight. The beam cut across the tatami and into the closet. Nothing. The coats hung undisturbed. Storage boxes were stacked neatly. I must have left it that way, I told myself. The next morning, on my way to the station, I glanced at the strip of trees beyond the tracks. In daylight, they were unimpressive, thin trunks tangled with vines. But as I watched, I felt the same imbalance as in my room, as if something within that dark cluster was aware of my attention. A co-worker mentioned the trees marked the edge of an old shrine property. "It was removed years ago," she said. Nothing important. That evening, another envelope waited. This photograph was closer. It showed my balcony door from outside. The glass reflected the interior faintly, my low table, the edge of my bed, and near the frame was a pale shape that might have been a face. I examined it until my eyes hurt. It could have been glare. I asked the landlord to check the entrance camera. No one had approached my mailbox except me. "You must be imagining things," he said gently. That night, I pushed my dresser in front of the closet door. Sleep came in shallow fragments. Each time I surfaced, I felt certain someone stood near my feet, just out of sight. I kept my eyes closed, afraid to confirm it. Around 3 in the morning, my phone vibrated. A notification from an unknown number. No message, only an attached image. My hands felt numb as I opened it. The photograph showed me lying in bed, taken from the foot of the futon. My face was turned toward the wall. The blanket rose and fell with my breathing. The angle was wrong. There was no space at the foot of my bed to stand. I sat up so quickly that my vision blurred. The room was empty. The dresser still blocked the closet. I checked the balcony door. Locked. The windows. Locked. The front door chain in place. The image remained on my screen. Over the next few days, more photographs arrived, sometimes in my mailbox, sometimes sent digitally from numbers that could not be traced. Each one was closer than the last. My kitchen sink with water clinging to the steel. My toothbrush in its cup. The back of my neck as I stood at the stove. Small things began to shift. The slippers at the Jenkin angled slightly inward, as if someone had stepped out of them carefully. The bathroom mirror tilted lower. My alarm set for 6:30, though I always chose 6:45. I stopped going to work. I told my manager I had the flu. During the day, the apartment felt almost normal. Sunlight flattened everything into harmless shapes. But as evening approached, the air grew heavier. The strip of trees beyond the tracks seemed to absorb the fading light, becoming a single dark mass. On the fourth night of my isolation, I sensed movement from the balcony. Not a crash, just the subtle pressure of weight shifting against metal. The curtain stirred. I remained seated at the low table, staring at the fabric. Slowly, the curtain drew back a few centimeters. Beyond the glass, the balcony was empty, but in the reflection I saw it. Behind me, near the closet, stood a figure shaped like a person yet indistinct, as if sketched in faint graphite. Its outline wavered. Where a face should have been, there was only a blur. I did not turn around. The reflection did not move. It simply occupied the space. My phone vibrated again. Another image. It showed the room from above. I sat at the table, staring at the curtain. And behind me, the figure leaned slightly forward, its head angled toward mine. A faint scent of old wood and damp earth filled the air, like the trees across the tracks after rain. The landlord had said it was quiet here. In that moment, I understood. The quiet was not emptiness. It was a space being held. Very slowly, I rose and walked to the Jenkin. I did not look toward the closet. I unlocked the door and stepped into the corridor. The hallway lights cast a weak yellow glow over peeling wallpaper. My neighbors' doors were shut. It felt as though the entire floor was vacant. My phone vibrated once more. The photograph showed the hallway from behind me. I stood in the corridor, phone in hand. At the threshold of my apartment, just inside the open door, the figure watched me leave. Its outline seemed clearer now. I looked up from the screen. My apartment doorway was empty. I am writing this from a bench beside the tracks. Dawn is approaching. Trains will begin running soon. Commuters will fill the platform. My apartment building stands across from me, silent and beige. On my phone, a new image waits unopened. If I look and the figure is no longer behind me, then it has chosen somewhere else to stand. And this platform is very quiet. I used to think the last train was the safest time to travel. There's a strange comfort in nearly empty carriages. The city feels paused, as if everyone else has agreed to step aside and let you pass through it alone. After overtime at the office in Shinagawa, I would catch the 12:47 a.m. local back to Saitama. Same platform, same vending machine glowing in the corner, same tired melody before departure. It was routine. That's why I noticed when something changed. One night in late October, I boarded the last train as usual. Only 3 other passengers were in my car. A middle-aged salaryman asleep with his head bowed, a university student with earphones in, and a woman standing near the door at the far end. She faced the window. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was that she didn't move at all when the train started. Most people sway slightly, adjust their footing, glance at their reflection. She remained perfectly still, hands at her sides, long black hair falling straight down her back. She wore a pale coat that looked slightly out of season. I remember thinking she must be exhausted. At the next station, the salaryman got off. The student followed 2 stops later. The woman didn't move. By the time we passed Akabane, I realized something else. I had never seen her reflection in the window. The glass showed the interior of the carriage clearly, the overhead ads, the metal hand straps, my own tired face hovering faintly over the darkness outside. But where she stood, there was only the empty door and the black tunnel beyond. I told myself it was the angle. When my stop approached, I stood and walked toward the door closest to the stairs at my station. That meant passing her. As I approached, I became aware of how quiet the carriage was. Not silent, just absent of the usual subtle human sounds. No shifting fabric. No breathing except my own. I slowed down without meaning to. She was closer to my height than I expected. The pale coat fell straight to her calves. Her shoes were simple black flats, slightly worn at the heel. I glanced at the window beside her. My reflection stared back at me, strained and pale. Her space remained empty. The train began to slow. I felt a pressure building behind my ears, like the change in air before a storm. Just before the doors opened, she tilted her head slightly toward me. Not enough to see her face, just enough to make it clear she knew I was there. The doors slid apart. I stepped out quickly, resisting the urge to look back. As I climbed the stairs, I told myself I was being irrational. Reflections fail all the time, lighting, angles, glare. Still, as the train pulled away, I glanced at the departing carriages. Through the window, I saw her. She was no longer facing the glass. She was facing outward,
Toward me.
her face was visible now, illuminated by the harsh interior lights. It was not distorted, not decayed, not monstrous. It was simply wrong. Her features were arranged correctly, eyes, nose, mouth. But there was no expression behind them, no focus. Her eyes were open too wide, fixed in a way that suggested she was looking through layers of distance, aligning herself with something only she could see. With me, the train disappeared into the dark.
I didn't sleep well that night.
The next evening, I left work earlier than usual to avoid the last train. I boarded a crowded 10:30 express instead. I told myself the presence of other passengers would dissolve whatever strange impression I'd formed. It worked, for a while. A week passed without incident. I almost forgot about her. Then overtime resumed. Reluctantly, I returned to the 1247. The platform was nearly empty. A cold wind moved along the tracks. I stepped into the same car, as before out of habit. She was already there, standing in the same position, facing the window. My chest tightened. I scanned the carriage. No one else. Just us. I considered stepping back out before the doors closed. But the chime sounded, and hesitation rooted me in place. The train began to move. This time, I kept my eyes on the window from where I stood. Again, no reflection. I forced myself to look directly at her silhouette in the glass. My reflection overlapped with her body, creating a layered image, my face hovering where hers should have been. Slowly, deliberately, her head began to turn. But in the window, nothing changed. Her physical body was rotating toward me. I could see the movement of her hair, the angle of her shoulder shifting. Yet the glass continued to show only the empty door. My heartbeat felt too loud in the enclosed space. When her head completed its turn, she was facing me fully. I could feel it. I looked up. She was closer. I don't remember seeing her step forward. She stood less than a meter away now. Her face was inches from mine. Up close, the wrongness was clearer. Her skin had a smooth, almost artificial texture, like a mask molded from memory. Her eyes were dark, but not reflective. They did not catch the overhead light. Her lips parted slightly.
You noticed, she said.
Her voice was soft and flat, like someone speaking in a room without furniture. I couldn't answer. The train sped through a stretch, without stations. Outside the window was only blackness. You noticed, she repeated, tilting her head in the same small, deliberate way as before. So now you can see. My vision blurred at the edges. For a brief second, the carriage shifted. The advertisements above the windows were gone. The hand straps hung limp and unmoving. The fluorescent lights flickered faintly, casting uneven shadows along the walls. And in every window, I saw her reflection. Not just one, dozens. Each pane of glass held her image, all facing inward, all watching me from impossible angles. Some stood too close to the glass. Some were slightly misaligned, their heads bent too far to one side. I shut my eyes. When I opened them, the carriage was normal again. She was no longer standing in front of me. She was back at the door, facing the window. The train began to slow for my station. I did not move. The doors opened. Cold night air slipped inside. After several seconds, a quiet realization settled over me. The announcement for my stop had not played. I looked up at the digital route display above the door. The screen was dark. Beyond the open doors was not my platform. It was another carriage, identical to ours, empty, brightly lit, stretching into the distance as if mirrored. The woman remained facing the glass, but in the window's reflection, she was no longer alone. I was standing beside her, perfectly still, facing forward. The doors began to close. I am writing this from my apartment, though I don't remember the journey home. Tomorrow, I will leave work early again. I will avoid the last train. But tonight, as I stand in my darkened kitchen, I can see the window above the sink reflecting the room behind me, the refrigerator, the hallway, the front door, and, beside me, a pale coat, facing forward, waiting for me to turn. I started using the coin lockers because of the rain. My apartment building doesn't have a proper delivery box, and packages kept getting left in the hallway. After one went missing, I began routing everything to the lockers inside Kichijoji Station. They're near the north exit, past the bakery that always smells faintly sweet even late at night. There are 2 rows of lockers, older beige ones with physical keys and newer gray ones with digital panels. I preferred the old ones. They felt more reliable. The first time it happened, I assumed it was a mistake. I had reserved locker 27 through the app. When I arrived after work, I found a small key already inserted into the lock. That was unusual. The system normally keeps the key inside until payment is confirmed. I pulled it out and opened the door. Inside was my package, a small cardboard box containing a pair of headphones. And behind it, taped to the inner wall, was a photograph. It showed the lockers, specifically locker 27. The door was slightly open, taken from behind me. I stared at the image for a long time. In the photo, I stood in front of the locker, phone in hand, unaware. The timestamp in the corner was from 5 minutes earlier. I turned slowly. Commuters flowed past in steady streams. A couple argued quietly near the ticket machines. A station attendant bowed to someone asking for directions. No one was looking at me. I told myself it was a prank, maybe someone testing a camera filter. I took the photo home and threw it away. A week later, I ordered a book and had it sent to locker 42. When I arrived, the key was already waiting again. My stomach tightened. I opened the door carefully. The book was there. So, was another photograph. This one was closer. It showed my right shoulder and the side of my face as I leaned toward the locker. The image was sharp enough to catch the pores on my skin. The angle was wrong. It had been taken from inside the locker. I dropped the photo and stepped back. The interior of the locker was shallow. There was no space for a camera behind the back panel. I ran my hand along the metal walls, searching for gaps. Nothing. Someone brushed past me, and I flinched hard enough to earn a strange look. I reported it to the station office. The attendant listened politely, examined the locker, and found nothing unusual. No hidden devices. No tampering. You should use the new lockers, he suggested gently. I nodded, but I didn't. There was something about the old lockers that felt consistent, solid, predictable. The next time, I didn't have a package. I was just passing through the station when I noticed locker 27 again. The key was inserted. I hadn't reserved it. I stood there for several seconds, debating whether to walk away. Instead, I reached out and turned the key. The door swung open smoothly. Inside was empty space and a photograph. It showed my apartment, specifically my bedroom. The image was taken from above, near the ceiling. I was asleep, one arm draped over my pillow. I don't own a ladder. I don't know how someone could have entered without waking me. The timestamp was from 3:12 a.m. My last train home that night had arrived at 12:47. I closed the locker carefully. When I stepped back, the station felt subtly altered. The ceiling seemed higher. the fluorescent lights harsher. Across the row, several other locker doors were slightly ajar. I was certain they had been closed before. One by one, they eased open another few centimeters, as if released from internal pressure. I could see darkness inside them. Not shadow, just a flat, depthless black. People continued walking past without reacting. A woman stopped at locker 19, inserted coins, and retrieved a shopping bag from inside. She didn't glance at the others. I looked back at locker 27. It was closed now. The key was gone. That night, I pushed my dresser against my bedroom door. Sleep came in fragments. At some point, I became aware of a faint metallic smell in the room, like old coins warmed by skin. I opened my eyes. My bedroom door was open. The dresser had been moved aside carefully, not shoved, shifted just enough to allow passage. At the foot of my bed stood a beige metal door, identical to the station lockers. It was embedded seamlessly into the wall, where my closet should have been. A small key protruded from a lock. I couldn't breathe. The room was silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Very slowly, I sat up. The locker door was at eye level from where I lay. Its surface was scratched, paint worn thin near the edges. On the metal, faintly reflected, I saw my own face. And behind it, rows and rows of identical beige doors stretching into darkness. The key turned on its own. The locker door opened a fraction. Inside was not darkness. It was light, cold, fluorescent station light. I could see the tiled floor of Kichijoji Station beyond the threshold. Commuters' legs passed by, indifferent. And directly opposite the open locker door, across the station corridor, was another locker. Its door was open. Inside that one was my bedroom, my bed, and me, sitting upright, staring out. We locked eyes. The version of me inside the station locker smiled faintly.
Not warmly, just knowingly.
I don't remember moving, but suddenly I was standing in front of the locker in my room. The fluorescent light from inside spilled across my floor. I could hear the distant melody that plays before a train departs. On the other side, people walked past, never looking down into the open door set into the station wall. My other self stepped forward, closer to the threshold. I noticed something then. He wasn't casting a reflection on the metal interior. He wasn't casting a shadow on the tile. He was slightly out of focus, like an image printed too many times. He reached toward me. I stepped back. The locker door began to close slowly. Not from his side. From mine. I lunged forward and grabbed the edge, trying to hold it open. The metal was cold and slick beneath my fingers. For a moment, our hands almost touched across the narrowing gap. Then the door shut completely. The locker vanished. My bedroom wall was intact. The dresser stood in its usual place. Morning light filtered through the curtains. I went to the station anyway.
I don't know why.
Locker 27 was there, as always. The key was inserted. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It showed the interior of a locker. From the station side, the door was open, and beyond it was my bedroom. Empty. The bed neatly made. No sign that anyone had slept there. I am writing this from a bench near the north exit. I haven't gone home, because I don't know which side of the door I'm on anymore. And I'm afraid that if I try my apartment key tonight, it won't fit. Or worse, it will. I found the website by accident. It was late, and I had fallen into the usual pattern, lying in bed with my phone inches from my face, scrolling without really seeing anything. At some point, I must have tapped a broken link, because the screen refreshed to a plain white page with a single line of text entered at the top. Do you want to see your room right now? There were 2 buttons beneath it.
Yes. No.
I remember feeling mildly annoyed. It looked like one of those fake horror games that circulate online. I almost closed the tab. Instead, I pressed no. The page reloaded. You are already looking. A grainy image appeared below the text. It took me a second to understand what I was seeing. It was my bedroom. The angle was wrong. High and slightly tilted, as if the camera were lodged in the upper corner of the ceiling. my desk, the half-open closet, the laundry chair by the window, and on the bed, illuminated by the dim blue light of my phone.
Me.
I dropped the phone. The image vanished. My ceiling was bare. White plaster, faint crack near the light fixture. No camera. I sat up slowly and turned in a full circle, scanning the room. Nothing. My phone buzzed against the mattress. Reluctantly, I picked it up. The page was still open. The image had updated. Now it showed me sitting upright, staring directly at the screen. The delay was minimal. Less than a second. A tight, hollow feeling spread through my chest. I stood and waved my arm experimentally. The figure in the image waved too. I told myself it had to be using my front camera somehow, overlaying a distorted version of the room. But the angle was impossible. My phone was in my hand. The image looked down on me from above. At the bottom of the page, new text appeared. There is a blind spot. The image zoomed slightly, reframing to show more of the area behind my bed. I turned to look. The wall was blank. On the screen, however, the space between my bed and the wall seemed darker than it should have been. Not shadowed, just dense. I stepped away from the bed. The image followed. The dark area remained in place. Another line of text appeared. Move closer. I didn't want to, but the longer I stared at the screen, the more certain I became that something subtle was shifting within that dense patch of darkness. A contour forming, a suggestion of depth. I took one cautious step toward the bed. In the image, the darkness sharpened. It wasn't empty space. It was the outline of a person standing flat against the wall, perfectly aligned with the vertical edge so that, from most angles, it disappeared. Its body was pressed impossibly thin. Its head tilted slightly toward where I had been lying.
My throat felt dry.
On instinct, I lunged forward and yanked the bed away from the wall. The legs scraped harshly against the floor. There was nothing there, just paint, slightly scuffed. My breathing came too fast. The image on the screen still showed the figure, but now it was no longer flattened. It stood fully formed in the open space I had created.
Tall.
Featureless, darker than the rest of the room, absorbing the dim light. It was standing exactly where I was. The perspective had shifted again. Now the camera angle was from near the door, pointed toward the bed. In the image, I was visible near the wall, staring at the screen, and the dark figure stood directly behind me. I spun around. My room was empty. The website updated. You turned too slowly. The image zoomed closer. The figure's head was inches from the back of my own. I could see the outline of my shoulders overlapping with it. I held my breath and stayed perfectly still. If it moved, I would feel it, wouldn't I? The image flickered briefly. For a fraction of a second, I saw something else. The same room, the same angle, but the bed was neatly made. The desk was cleared, and I was not there. The figure stood alone in the center of the room, facing the camera. When the image stabilized, I was visible again, but slightly faded, as if my opacity had been lowered. My hands began to tremble. I backed toward the door. The image tracked me smoothly. The dark figure did not move. It didn't need to. Another line of text appeared. If you leave the frame, you stay there. I froze. The live image showed me halfway between the bed and the door. Behind me, the figure leaned forward slightly, its outline thinning again, stretching toward the corner where the wall met the ceiling. I made a decision. I would test it. Slowly, carefully, I stepped sideways, out of the camera's view. On the screen, my body drifted toward the edge of the frame. My shoulder clipped the border, then my arm, then half my torso. The figure did not follow. It remained centered, waiting. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my ears. With one final movement, I stepped completely out of view. I stood against the wall near the door, staring at my phone. The image showed my bedroom. Empty. The dark figure stood alone in the center. After a few seconds, it tilted its head, as if listening. Then, slowly, it turned toward the place where I was standing in real life, outside the frame. The text appeared one last time. "You are still in the room." The image began to brighten. Not gradually, just enough that the shadows thinned. And I realized something that made my knees weaken. The camera was no longer in the corner. It was closer, at eye level. The perspective matched my height, as if whoever or whatever was filming had stepped forward to take my place. The dark figure on the screen took a single step toward the camera.
Toward me.
My phone vibrated violently in my hand. The page refreshed. Now the image showed the room from above again, the bed against the wall,
The desk. The chair.
and on the floor near the door, a phone, its screen glowing faintly. The room was otherwise empty. I am writing this from my work computer the next morning. I did not go back into the bedroom. I slept on the kitchen floor with the lights on. When I finally gathered the courage to retrieve my phone, it was not where the image had shown it. It was back on my bed.
Charging.
I don't know if the website is still active,
I don't want to check.
because I can't shake the feeling that the camera was never in the corner. It was always at eye level, and I don't know whose eyes I was borrowing. The first time I visited the Inanaki Tunnel, it was during the day. I don't believe in curses. I don't believe in places being wrong. But when you grow up in Fukuoka, you hear the stories anyway. People say the old tunnel is avoided by locals, that if you enter after dark, you might meet something that doesn't belong to the road anymore. During the afternoon, it looked disappointing. Cracked concrete, rusted guardrails, weeds pushing through the asphalt. The entrance yawned wide and gray, swallowing the light a few meters in. I walked halfway through, took a photo, and left. Nothing happened. I posted the picture that night with a caption joking about surviving. The comment appeared an hour later. "You shouldn't have stood there." No profile picture. No other posts. I ignored it. 2 days later, I received a direct message from the same account. It was an image. The old tunnel from inside. Taken at night. The perspective was deeper than I had gone, facing outward toward the entrance. The circle of daylight at the end was small and distant. In the foreground, slightly off-center, stood a person. It took me a moment to recognize the jacket. It was mine. The figure was facing the camera, but the face was too dark to make out. The timestamp in the corner was from the previous night. I had been home. I checked my own phone gallery. No missing time. No unexplained trips. I blocked the account. That night, I dreamed of the tunnel. In the dream, I was standing at the entrance again, but the surrounding forest was silent. No insects. No wind. The air felt heavy, as if the space inside the tunnel was exhaling slowly. From somewhere deep within, I could see a faint silhouette, standing exactly where I had stood during the day, watching the entrance, watching me. I woke with the sensation that someone had been standing beside my bed. The room was empty. The next evening, while scrolling through my photos, I found something I didn't remember taking. It was the original daytime picture, but the brightness was lower. The tunnel interior looked darker than before, and near the back wall, farther in than I had walked, there was a faint vertical shape, like a person pressed flat against the concrete. I zoomed in. The shape blurred into pixels. Another message arrived. A new account. You left before it could see you. Attached was another image. This time, the perspective was from just inside the tunnel entrance, facing inward. The photo was taken at night. A single figure stood deeper inside, again wearing my jacket, but now the face was visible. It was mine, expressionless, eyes slightly unfocused. I checked the metadata. The image had been created 3 minutes earlier. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I was sitting at my desk in my apartment in Hakata. I turned slowly toward the window. The glass reflected my room, and behind my reflection, for a fraction of a second, I saw a curved concrete wall. When I looked directly at the window, it was just glass. Streetlights glowed below. My phone vibrated again. "Come back," the message read. "I'm still here." I don't know why I went. Curiosity, maybe. Or the stubborn desire to prove something wasn't possible. I drove out just before midnight. The road to the old tunnel was narrower than I remembered. Trees leaned inward, branches forming a restless canopy overhead. My headlights carved a thin path through the dark. When I reached the clearing, I almost turned around. The tunnel entrance looked smaller at night,
Compressed.
as if the hill above it had sagged slightly. I stepped out of the car. The forest was unnaturally quiet. No distant traffic. No rustling leaves. Just the faint hum of my engine cooling. I approached the entrance slowly. The air changed a few steps in, cooler, damp. My footsteps echoed faintly against the concrete. I stopped at the point where I had stood during the day. I took out my phone. No signal. The darkness ahead felt layered, as though the tunnel were longer than before. Then I saw him, a silhouette further inside, standing perfectly still, wearing my jacket, facing me. He was positioned exactly where he had been in the photos. I swallowed. "This isn't funny," I said softly, my voice sounding thin against the tunnel walls. He did not respond. I took a step forward.
He took a step back.
Not turning, not shifting, just sliding deeper into the dark. I felt a sudden certainty that if he reached the bend near the far end, I would never see him again, and something would take his place. I rushed forward. The echo of my footsteps multiplied unnaturally, overlapping as if more than one person were running. The figure stopped abruptly. Only a few meters separated us now. In the dim light from the entrance behind me, I could see his face. It was mine, but the eyes were wrong. Not empty, not hollow, just focused somewhere slightly above my head, as if watching something standing behind me. A slow, understanding dread crept up my spine. The air near my back felt colder, thicker. The other me smiled faintly, not mockingly, more like relief. He stepped sideways, out of my direct line, as if making space. The darkness behind me shifted, not a dramatic movement, just a subtle rearrangement of shadow. I did not turn around. I knew, with absolute clarity, that if I did, I would see the entrance far away in front of me, and only darkness behind. The version of me inside the tunnel tilted his head slightly. "You shouldn't have stood there," he said quietly. His voice echoed from both ahead and behind at once. My phone vibrated in my pocket. There was no signal. I ran. I don't remember passing him. I don't remember reaching the entrance. But I found myself outside, collapsed against the gravel, the forest sounds slowly returning like a delayed recording. My car was still there. The tunnel looked ordinary again, empty. When I got home, I locked every door and window. I avoided mirrors. I avoided my camera. This morning I opened my phone gallery. There is a new album, untitled. Inside are dozens of photos, all taken from inside the tunnel, all at night. In each one, I am standing at the entrance, facing inward, slowly stepping deeper. In the most recent image, I am almost at the bend, smiling faintly, and the caption beneath the album reads, "Thank you for switching places." I started visiting the laundromat because my washing machine wouldn't stop. It began with a low vibration in the floor of my apartment in Itabashi. At first I thought it was construction from another unit, but the rhythm was too steady. It pulsed every night around 2:13 a.m., lasting exactly 11 minutes. I timed it. The sound was faint, like a distant drum being struck underwater. I pressed my ear to the floor. The vibration was strongest near the bathroom. When I unplugged my washing machine, the vibration continued. On the third night, I opened the lid during the 2:13 pulse. The drum was spinning, slowly. There was no power connected, no water, just a smooth, deliberate rotation, as if something inside were turning it by hand. I stepped back, so quickly I hit the sink. The spinning stopped. The room fell silent. The next morning, I carried my laundry 3 blocks to a 24-hour laundromat near the river. It was narrow and brightly lit, with rows of older machines that hummed constantly. A security camera hung in one corner, its small red indicator steady. I felt safer there. Other people came and went at all hours, shift workers, students, an elderly woman who folded clothes with precise movements. The first night I used it, nothing unusual happened. The second night, I noticed a machine at the far end of the row was already running. It was 2:10 a.m. No one stood near it. The glass door revealed only darkness inside. No clothes, no water. Yet the drum rotated gently, in the same slow rhythm as mine at home. I told myself someone must have started it and stepped outside. At 2:13 a.m., the rotation changed. It became more deliberate, measured. I watched the seconds tick by on my phone. The machine vibrated slightly against the tiled floor. The other machines remained still. I felt a familiar tremor beneath my shoes. The same underwater rhythm. When I looked up, I realized something that made my mouth go dry. Every machine in the laundromat had begun to spin.
Not fast.
Not violently, just slowly, steadily, in perfect synchronization. All of them empty. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered faintly, then stabilized. The door chimed as someone entered. I turned quickly. No one stood there. The glass door swung gently on its hinges before settling closed. The machine stopped at once. The silence was overwhelming. I finished my laundry quickly and left. That night, I dreamed of rows of washing machines stretching endlessly in both directions. Each one had a glass door, and behind each glass door was a room. A different room. Bedrooms.
Kitchens.
Offices. All dimly lit. In every room, someone stood very still, watching the glass from the inside. I woke at 2:13 a.m. My apartment was quiet. No vibration. Relief flooded me. Then I heard it. A faint sloshing sound. Not from the bathroom.
From the hallway.
I stepped out of my bedroom slowly. The hall light was off. At the far end, near the entrance, stood my washing machine. It was no longer in the bathroom. It sat directly in front of my front door, plugged into nothing, its drum spinning slowly. Water pressed against the inside of the glass. Dark water. The machine vibrated in that steady, underwater rhythm. I couldn't move. Through the glass, something pale drifted past the circular window. Not clothing. Too smooth. It passed again. Closer this time. A hand. Floating as if suspended. The fingers were relaxed, not clawing or striking. Just drifting with the slow rotation. The drum turned. The hand disappeared. Then a face rolled into view against the glass. It was mine. Eyes closed. Mouth slightly open. Hair floating weightlessly. I staggered back, my heel catching on the edge of the hallway rug. The machine continued its calm rotation. The face inside the drum opened its eyes. They focused directly on me. The version of me behind the glass did not look afraid. It looked patient. The spinning slowed. The water level dropped gradually, revealing more of the body inside. It was fully me, clothed in what I was wearing now. As the drum came to a stop, the face pressed gently against the glass from the inside. The lips moved. I couldn't hear anything over the dull vibration in my ears, but I could read them.
Switch.
The washing machine door clicked softly. Unlocked. I shook my head. "I'm not in there," I whispered. The fluorescent light above flickered once. When it stabilized, the hallway looked slightly longer than before. The front door seemed farther away. The machine door eased open by a few centimeters. Water began to spill onto the floor. It wasn't clear. It was murky, almost black, carrying a faint metallic scent. The water spread toward my feet. Cold. The body inside shifted weakly, as if buoyancy were fading. I realized with mounting horror that the person in the drum was no longer rotating. It was lying still at the bottom, and I was standing upright. The vibration beneath my feet grew stronger. Not from the machine in front of me, from beneath the floor, from the walls, from everywhere at once. As if the entire building were filled with hidden drums turning in unison. The face inside the machine began to blur. Not because of water, because it was losing detail. The features smoothed, flattened, like a reflection being wiped away. I felt lightheaded, unsteady. The hallway around me seemed to curve slightly, like the inside of a cylinder. My balance shifted. For one disorienting second, I felt as though I were the one lying on my side, pressed against cool glass. Looking outward, at myself standing in the hallway, the version of me outside stepped back from the spreading water. His expression was horrified. Mine was calm. The machine door swung fully open. Water poured out onto the floor. I blinked. I was standing. The hallway was dry. The washing machine was back in the bathroom. Silent. Unplugged. I walked to it slowly. The drum was still.
Empty.
When I touched the glass, it was warm. That was 3 nights ago. Since then, I haven't heard the vibration. I haven't gone back to the laundromat. But tonight, at exactly 2:13 a.m., my phone alarm went off. I don't have an alarm set for that time. The screen displayed a notification. No app icon. No sender. Just a single line. Cycle complete. The bathroom light is on. I don't remember turning it on. And I can hear water draining.
Slowly.
As if something inside has just finished washing. When I moved into the share house in Koenji, I was mostly relieved. Tokyo apartments are expensive, and the listing promised quiet tenants and respect for personal space. There were 6 rooms arranged along a narrow hallway, with a shared kitchen at the end. My room was 3B. The first thing I noticed was the rule sheet taped inside my door. It was handwritten. Do not open another person's door. Do not knock after 11 p.m. If you hear knocking after 11 p.m., ignore it. I assumed it was someone's attempt at humor. Share houses attract eccentric people. I met 2 of my housemates the first week. A university student in 2A who rarely left his room, and a woman in 1C who worked night shifts. We exchanged polite greetings in the kitchen. No one mentioned the rules. The room across from mine, 3A, was always closed. I never saw anyone enter or leave. At night, the house settled into a heavy silence. The hallway light remained on until midnight, then turned off automatically. After that, the only illumination came from the faint emergency light above the exit. The first time I heard it, I checked my phone. 11:42 p.m. 3 soft taps on my door. Not loud, not urgent, just measured. I held still in bed, staring at the ceiling. Another 3 taps. I remembered the rule sheet and felt a faint irritation. Someone was trying to be clever. I got up quietly and approached the door. Through the thin wood, I could sense someone standing on the other side. Not moving, just present. I reached for the handle. Then I hesitated. The hallway light had turned off at 11 p.m. No one should have been there without stumbling in the dark. The taps came again, this time slightly lower on the door, as if the hand had shifted down. I stepped back. I'm not opening it, I said softly, unsure why I felt the need to respond. The tapping stopped. I waited for footsteps retreating down the hallway. There were none. Eventually, I returned to bed. The next morning, I opened my door. The hallway was empty. Room 3A remained closed. I examined my door for marks. There were 3 faint smudges near the center, and 3 lower down. The following night, it happened again. 11:42 p.m. 3 taps. I stayed in bed. 3 more taps. This time from my closet door. I sat upright, so quickly my vision blurred. The closet was inside my room. A sliding wooden panel built into the wall. The taps came again. Measured. Deliberate. I forced myself to stand and approach it. My reflection in the darkened window looked thinner somehow. The closet door trembled slightly, as if something leaned against it from inside. Stop, I whispered. The tapping ceased. Silence returned so abruptly it felt artificial. In the morning, I opened the closet. My clothes hung neatly, storage boxes undisturbed, but the back wall seemed farther away than I remembered, as if the depth had increased by a few centimeters. I measured it with my hand. It felt normal. That evening, I waited in the kitchen until after midnight, pretending to scroll on my phone. No one else was there. At 11:41 p.m., I slipped back into the hallway and stood outside my door. I wanted to see who would knock. 11:42 p.m. 3 taps. From inside my room, I froze. The sound was unmistakable. It came from the other side of my own door, as if someone inside had just knocked to be let out. My breath shortened. Slowly, I looked at room 3A across the hall. Its door was slightly open, just a crack. I had never seen it open before. The darkness inside was dense and unlit. Another 3 taps came from my room, lower this time, near the floor. I stepped backward, without meaning to. Room 3A's door opened a fraction more. I could see a sliver of its interior wall. And on that wall,
A door.
identical to mine, with the number 3B on it. I felt something inside my chest tighten painfully. The hallway seemed longer than before. The emergency light flickered faintly. From inside 3A, I heard it. 3 taps on the 3B door within, followed by 3 taps from my actual room behind me, perfectly synchronized. I turned slowly. My own door was closed. Still, another set of taps, this time frantic, not louder, just faster, as if whoever was inside had grown impatient. The handle of my door began to turn, very slightly, not enough to open, just enough to test the latch. I stepped away. Room 3A's door swung fully open. The room was empty except for the single door on the far wall.
My door.
It stood ajar. Inside, I could see my bed, my desk, my jacket hanging from the chair, and someone standing near the closet, back turned, wearing my clothes. At 11:42 p.m., the figure inside 3A's version of my room raised its hand. 3 taps echoed from both rooms at once. I didn't remember crossing the hallway, but suddenly I was standing in the doorway of 3A, staring into the duplicate of my own space. The air felt thicker inside. He began to turn around. I backed away instantly. The hallway seemed narrower. My real door was now slightly open too, and from within, I saw the faint outline of someone standing in the dark, waiting near the closet. The rule sheet inside my door had one more line now, written in the same careful handwriting. If you open the wrong door, do not return to your room. It is 11:39 p.m. as I write this. I am sitting in the kitchen. Room 3A's door is closed again. So is mine. I don't know which one is mine anymore. In 3 minutes, someone will knock. And I'm afraid that this time, it won't be asking to come in. It will be asking to switch. When my grandmother began forgetting things, we moved her into my apartment. It was temporary, my mother said, just until we figured out a better arrangement. Her house in Saitama had grown too large for her to manage alone. She would leave the kettle on, misplace her wallet in the freezer, call me at work to ask what year it was. In my 1-bedroom in Setagaya, I gave her the bedroom and took the futon in the living room. At first, it felt almost peaceful. She spent most of the day seated by the window, watching the narrow street below. Children passed on their way to school. Delivery trucks stopped and started. She would comment softly on the weather, on the neighbor's dog, on how different the air felt compared to her old house. But sometimes, in the late afternoon, she would say something that didn't fit. "They're early today," she murmured once.
Who?
I asked. She looked at me as if I'd asked something obvious. The ones who stand by the pole. There was a utility pole outside our building, wrapped in faded safety stripes. Nothing else. No one's there, I told her gently. She frowned, unsettled. They don't like being pointed at. I assumed it was confusion. The doctor had warned us her mind would try to fill in gaps. One night, I woke to the sound of the front door sliding open. Not abruptly, carefully. I sat up on my futon, heart racing. The Genken light was off. The apartment was dark except for the faint glow of the city outside. I heard the soft shuffle of slippers on tile. "Grandma?" I whispered. No answer. I rose quietly and stepped into the hallway. The front door was slightly ajar. Cold night air drifted inside. She stood at the threshold, staring out into the corridor of the apartment building. Her back was to me. "What are you doing?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm.
They're waiting, she said.
My stomach tightened. For what? She tilted her head slightly. For you to notice. The hallway outside was empty. The fluorescent ceiling lights cast a steady, clinical brightness over identical doors and beige walls. I guided her gently back inside and locked the door. The next morning, she didn't remember it. But that evening, as the sun set, she became restless. She stood by the window longer than usual. "They've moved closer," she whispered. I stood beside her and looked down. The street was normal. A cyclist passed. A woman walked her small white dog. "Closer where?" She lifted a trembling finger and pointed, not to the street, but to the reflection in the glass.
I saw us standing there.
And behind us, faintly, the outline of the kitchen, the refrigerator, the narrow hallway. No one else. "There," she insisted. I stared harder at the reflection. For a brief second, so brief I questioned it, I thought I saw a darker vertical shape near the hallway wall. But when I turned around, the hallway was empty. That night, I moved the futon into the bedroom with her. I told myself it was to keep an eye on her. Around 3 a.m., she shook my shoulder. "They're inside now," she breathed. I forced myself awake. The bedroom door was open. I was certain I had closed it. The hallway beyond was unlit. The apartment felt deeper than usual, as if the distance from the bedroom to the kitchen had stretched. I listened carefully. No footsteps. No movement. Just a dense silence. "They stand where the walls meet," she said. "You can't see them unless you forget how the room is shaped." I swallowed. Her eyes were clearer than they had been in weeks. "Grandma," I said softly, "there's nothing there." She looked at me with sudden, sharp sadness. "They were in my house too," she said. "In the corners. By the stairs." I thought it was my mind. A faint pressure built in my ears. I turned slowly toward the doorway. The angle where the hallway met the ceiling seemed slightly darker than the rest. Not shadowed, just thicker, as if the air had weight. I blinked. It looked normal again. The next day, I called my mother and insisted we accelerate the search for a care facility. When I returned home from work, the apartment felt colder. The bedroom door was open. My grandmother sat upright on the bed, fully dressed. "They don't want me anymore," she said. "What do you mean?" "They're curious about you." A thin line of unease ran through me. I laughed weakly. "That's not funny." She didn't smile. That night, I decided to test something. I stood in the hallway with all the lights on. I studied the corners carefully, the places where walls met ceiling, where the floor met baseboards. Everything looked solid.
Still.
"See," I said gently. She watched me from the bedroom doorway. "You're looking too directly," she replied. The lights flickered once. Just once. When they stabilized, the apartment felt subtly rearranged. Not visibly different, but the proportions fell off. The hallway longer, the ceiling slightly lower. My chest tightened. I walked to the front door to reassure myself. As I reached for the handle, I noticed something that made my skin prickle. The shadow cast by my body on the wall did not match my posture. My arm was at my side. The shadow's arm was slightly raised. I stepped back. The shadow did not. It remained where it was, angled toward the corner near the ceiling. Very slowly, the tip of its hand touched the meeting point of wall and plaster. The corner darkened. Not dramatically, just enough to suggest depth. Behind me, my grandmother spoke in a voice that sounded almost relieved. "You see them now." I didn't turn around. The shadow on the wall leaned forward slightly, as if peering into a space I couldn't access. The corner of the hallway deepened into something that did not resemble architecture. Something patient. The lights flickered again. When they steadied, my shadow was normal. My arm hung naturally. The corner was just a corner. My grandmother was asleep in the bedroom, breathing softly. In the morning, she didn't wake up confused. She didn't wake up at all. The doctor said it was peaceful, natural. I live alone again now. The apartment feels larger, quieter. But sometimes, when the sun sets and the walls take on that muted evening color, I notice something subtle in the corners. Not movement, not figures, just the sense that the room is slightly misremembering its own shape. Last night, I caught myself standing very still in the hallway, tilting my head slightly. trying to forget how the room is shaped. And for a moment, I thought I saw someone standing patiently where the wall meets the ceiling, waiting for me to notice properly. I started going to the seaside town because no one I knew had ever heard of it. It was 2 hours south of Sendai, a place where the train came only once every hour and the station was unmanned after sunset. The platform faced the ocean directly. When the tide was high, the waves sounded close enough to touch. I found it by accident while browsing a travel forum. Someone had posted a single sentence: "If you get off at Shiosaki after 6 p.m., you might see the extra train." There were no replies. I don't believe in hidden trains or secret schedules, but I like empty places. So one Friday after work, I rode the local line down the coast and stepped off at Shiosaki at 6:12 p.m. The station was exactly as described: 2 platforms, a small wooden shelter, a faded map of the area. Beyond the tracks, the ocean stretched gray and endless under a low sky. No staff. No ticket gates, just a metal box to deposit fares. I waited. At 6:58 p.m., the return train arrived and left again, carrying away the only other passenger who had gotten off with me. After it disappeared around the curve, the station settled into a quiet, so complete it felt staged. The sun dipped below the horizon. The platform lights flickered on, casting weak halos on the concrete. 6:59 p.m. I told myself I would leave at 7:30 and catch the next train back. At 7:04 p.m., I heard it. Not the rush of a normal train. A lower sound.
Smooth.
Continuous. From the direction of the ocean. There are no tracks by the water. Yet from beyond the station, along the seawall, a single carriage slid into view. It moved slowly, almost politely, as if careful not to startle me. The carriage was old, cream-colored with a thin blue stripe, like trains from decades ago. The windows glowed faintly from inside. It did not run on tracks. It hovered just above the ground, aligned perfectly with the platform edge. No driver was visible. It came to a stop without any audible braking. The doors remained closed. I stood frozen, half thrilled, half aware that this was not something that fit inside the world I understood. After a few seconds, the doors opened. The interior lights were dimmer than the station's. The seats were upholstered in a faded pattern I vaguely recognized from childhood trips. No one was inside. I looked up and down the platform. The ocean rolled steadily in the background, indifferent. I stepped inside. The doors closed immediately behind me. The carriage began to move, but not along the coastline. Through the windows, the station slid away in the wrong direction, toward the sea. The ocean did not draw closer. Instead, it stretched outward, flattening into a dark plain without waves. The sky above turned a uniform gray, without depth. I remained standing, gripping the metal pole near the door. There was no vibration beneath my feet, no sense of acceleration, just the quiet awareness of forward motion. I walked down the aisle. The carriage seemed longer than it had from the outside. Rows of seats extended farther than the structure should allow. Halfway down, I noticed something on one of the seats.
A bag.
Black. Familiar. I approached slowly. It was my work bag. The small scratch near the zipper, the loose thread at the strap, details I recognized instantly. I checked my shoulder. My bag was gone. The one on the seat lay open. Inside was my phone. The screen was on. It displayed a live image of the carriage interior, from the perspective of the last row. I turned. At the far end of the carriage, I could see myself standing by the seat, holding the bag. The image on the phone updated in real time, but the version of me in the last row was seated, watching. My pulse hammered in my ears. I looked up from the screen. The last row was empty. I walked slowly toward it. Each step felt slightly delayed, as if the floor were responding a fraction of a second after my foot made contact. When I reached the final row, I turned and sat down. The seat was warm. On the phone screen, the perspective shifted. Now it showed the platform at Shiosaki Station. Empty. The timestamp in the corner read 6:12 p.m. the moment I had first stepped off the real train. In the image, I stood alone on the platform, looking toward the ocean. Behind that version of me, the cream-colored carriage waited silently. The doors open. I watched myself on the screen hesitate, then step inside.
The doors closed.
The platform remained empty. The timestamp advanced to 6:13 p.m., but nothing else changed. The image did not show the carriage leaving. It simply showed the empty station, as if the train had never been there at all. The phone vibrated softly in my hand. A new image replaced the live feed. It showed the interior of the carriage. From above, every seat occupied, every passenger facing forward, their faces indistinct, blended, except for one seat in the last row. Empty, waiting. I looked around. The carriage was still empty, silent. The ocean outside the window was now completely still, like a painted backdrop. The phone vibrated again. The image updated. The last row was no longer empty. A figure sat there, facing forward. I felt the warmth beside me deepen. The cushion shifted slightly. The phone screen went black. When I looked up, the carriage lights had dimmed further. Across the aisle, every seat was now occupied, not by distinct people, but by shapes. Human outlines filled with a density that swallowed detail, all facing forward, none acknowledging me. The train slowed. Through the window, I saw the outline of a platform approaching. It looked like Shiosaki, but older. The wood of the shelter darker. The sign faded almost completely. No lights. The carriage came to a gentle stop. The doors opened. No one moved. The shapes remained seated, facing forward. I stood carefully. As I stepped into the aisle, every head turned in unison.
Not toward me.
Toward the empty seat I had just left. I looked back. The seat was no longer empty. Someone sat there now, wearing my coat, facing forward, perfectly still. The doors remained open. The platform outside was silent, unlit, waiting. I am writing this from the wooden shelter at Shiosaki Station. At least, I think it's Shiosaki. There are no timetables posted, no map. The ocean is perfectly flat. My phone shows no signal. It is 6:12 p.m. A train just arrived. No one got off. The doors are open, and I have the strange, steady feeling that if I don't board this time, there won't be a version of me left on the platform at all. I started using the overnight capsule bus because it was cheaper than the Shinkansen. It ran from Tokyo to Osaka, leaving at 11:30 p.m. from a quiet lot near Shinagawa. The bus was long and unmarked, painted a dull gray with darkened windows. Inside, instead of regular seats, there were stacked sleeping pods, 2 rows on each side, narrow compartments with curtains you could pull closed. It felt private, contained. You climbed a small ladder to reach the upper pods. Each space had a thin mattress, a reading light, and a small vent that hummed softly. Once the curtains were drawn, you couldn't see the aisle at all. The first time I rode it, I slept surprisingly well. The second time, I noticed something strange. After departure, a recorded announcement played softly from hidden speakers, reminding passengers to remain in their pods while the bus was in motion. The voice was polite, neutral, almost soothing. Around 1:15 a.m., I woke up. Not fully, just enough to register that the bus had stopped. The engine was silent. No vibration beneath me. I checked my phone. No signal. I assumed we were at a rest stop. From beyond my curtain, I heard something move down the aisle.
Not footsteps exactly.
More like fabric shifting against fabric. I told myself other passengers were adjusting in their pods. Then I heard the ladder at the foot of my pod creak slightly. I froze. No one had any reason to climb up to me. The curtain trembled faintly, as if brushed by a passing hand. I held my breath. After several seconds, the sensation faded. The engine started again. The bus resumed its steady hum. In the morning, we arrived in Osaka without incident. I convinced myself I had imagined it. On my third trip, I chose a lower pod, thinking it would feel less exposed. We departed on time. The same soft announcement played. At 1:15 a.m., I woke again. The bus had stopped. This time, I listened carefully. The air inside the pod felt heavier than before. The vent above me emitted a faint, uneven breath. From outside my curtain came a slow, deliberate sound, like someone dragging their fingers lightly along each closed curtain as they moved down the aisle, one by one, pausing briefly at each pod.
Continuing.
I counted silently. There were 12 pods on my side. The sound passed the first, the second, the third. Each time, it lingered for just a second too long. By the time it reached mine, my entire body felt rigid. The curtain shifted inward slightly, pressing toward my face. Not pulled open, just tested. The pressure remained there, then moved on. I lay awake until morning. When we arrived, I stepped off quickly, trying not to look back inside. As I walked away, I noticed something odd. The bus had no company logo, no license plate on the front, just a blank metal surface. I told myself I was being paranoid. Still, before booking it again, I searched online for reviews. I found almost nothing, just a single forum thread. One comment stood out. If it stops twice before 2 a.m., don't stay in your pod. I laughed uneasily. On my fourth trip, I tried to stay awake. The bus departed. The city lights thinned. The hum of the engine settled into a steady rhythm. At 1:15 a.m., the bus stopped. I was ready. I counted to 30. The engine restarted. I exhaled slowly. Then, at 1:27 a.m., it stopped again. This time, there was no engine sound afterward. Only silence. The air inside the pod grew colder. From beyond the curtain came the now familiar dragging sound. But it was different. Heavier. As if something were leaning its full weight against each pod in turn. The entire structure creaked softly as it moved. I heard a faint click from somewhere ahead of me. A curtain being drawn open. Then a long pause. Then the soft thud of something settling into an empty space. The dragging resumed. Pod by pod. Closer. I realized something with a rising sense of dread. The sound was no longer moving from front to back. It was moving randomly, doubling back, rechecking, as if counting. When it reached mine, the curtain did not merely tremble. It was pulled aside halfway. Cold air rushed in. I kept my eyes closed. I could feel the absence of the curtain, the openness. Something hovered at the edge of the pod, close enough that I sensed a shift in the air near my face. Not breathing, just presence. Seconds stretched unbearably. Then, slowly, the curtain slid shut again. The dragging sound retreated down the aisle. I waited. Minutes passed. No engine. No movement. Finally, I dared to open my eyes. The pod was dimly lit by the faint aisle light leaking through the curtain edges. I reached for my phone. No signal. 1:29 a.m. I slid the curtain aside just enough to look out. The aisle was empty. Every curtain was fully closed. The bus was not at a rest stop. Through the narrow window at the front, I could see nothing but darkness. No road lights. No buildings. Just black. I stepped out of my pod carefully. The floor felt stable. Too stable. As if we were not on a road at all. I moved down the aisle. The curtains on both sides were completely still. I stopped beside the nearest one and pulled it back slightly. The pod was empty. The blanket neatly folded. No sign anyone had been inside. I checked another. Empty. Another. Empty. All 12 pods on my side. Vacant. I walked to the front of the bus. The driver's seat was empty too. The windshield showed only darkness. Not night sky. Not forest. Just a flat, depthless black. Behind me, in the aisle, I heard a soft shift. Every curtain moved at once. Not opening, just tightening inward, as if something inside each pod had leaned back into place. Slowly, in unison, the engine roared to life. The bus lurched forward. I stumbled, catching myself on a ladder. The dragging sound resumed, but now it moved above me, across the upper pods. Testing. Counting. When we arrived in Osaka, the sun was rising. Passengers stepped off calmly, adjusting bags, checking phones.
I stared at them.
They looked normal, ordinary, but I couldn't remember seeing any of their faces before. As the bus pulled away, I noticed the windows were too dark to see inside. I haven't taken it again, but sometimes, at exactly 1:27 a.m., my phone loses signal for a few minutes. And in the silence of my apartment, I can almost hear it. Fabric shifting, moving from room to room, pausing outside my bedroom door.
Counting.
I agreed to look after the shrine because no one else wanted to. It sits at the edge of my hometown in Yamanashi, halfway up a wooded hill behind a row of aging houses. When we were children, we were told not to play near it. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was unfinished. No one ever explained what that meant. The shrine itself is small, just a wooden honden with a faded Shimenawa rope and a narrow offering box. No priest has served there in years. The town maintains it out of habit more than devotion. When my father mentioned that the neighborhood association needed someone to sweep the steps and check for vandalism once a week, I volunteered without thinking. It felt simple, harmless. The first evening I went up, the air smelled of damp leaves. Cicadas droned in the trees, loud and insistent. The shrine looked exactly as I remembered, weathered wood, stone fox statues on either side, their faces worn smooth by time. I swept the steps, emptied a few old coins from the offering box, and bowed out of reflex before leaving. Nothing happened. The second week, I noticed the rope had been retied. The Shimenawa had sagged badly for years, its paper streamers torn and yellowed. Now it hung neatly, the white paper crisp and clean. I assumed someone from the association had replaced it. I asked my father later. He frowned. We haven't had the budget for that. That night, I dreamed of the shrine. In the dream, I stood at the top of the stone steps, looking down toward the houses. The town was gone. In its place was a dense forest stretching in all directions. When I turned back toward the shrine, the honden door was open. Inside was not darkness. It was a narrow hallway extending impossibly deep into the hill. Paper lanterns hung at intervals along the corridor, each one unlit. From somewhere far down the hallway, I heard the soft shuffle of feet. I woke with the sensation that I had been counted. The third week, I climbed the steps just before sunset. The air felt heavier than usual. The fox statues seemed slightly angled inward, their blank eyes no longer facing the path, but the shrine door. The Shimenawa rope was immaculate again.
New.
As if replaced that morning. I approached the offering box. Inside were coins I didn't recognize. Old yen with designs I had only seen in history books. Tarnished, but carefully arranged. There was also something else. A small wooden plaque. On it, in neat handwriting, was my name. No message.
Just my name.
I looked around instinctively. The trees were still. The town below emitted faint, ordinary sounds. Distant traffic, a dog barking. I told myself it was a prank, but as I stepped closer to the honden, I saw that the wooden doors were slightly ajar. They had always been sealed shut. I stood very still, listening. No insects. No wind. Just a low, steady sound from inside. Not mechanical. Not animal. Breathing. Slow.
Deep.
The interior was dark, but I could see the faint outline of the inner altar. And beyond it,
Space.
far more space than the building could contain. The low breathing sound continued. Measured. Patient. My body felt strangely light, as if I were standing too high above the ground. Without thinking, I stepped forward. The air inside the honden was colder. The wooden floorboards did not creak beneath my weight. The darkness beyond the altar seemed layered, like folds of fabric draped one behind another. The breathing shifted. Closer now. I realized with growing clarity that it was not a single breath. It was many, inhaling together, exhaling together. I stumbled back out onto the steps. The evening light seemed too bright, too flat. The fox statues now faced directly toward the open doors. Their stone mouths curved in faint, identical smiles. I forced myself to close the honden doors. The wood felt warm under my hands. As the panels met, the breathing stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was worse. That night, the dream returned. I stood again at the top of the steps. The forest surrounded me. The honden doors were open wide. The hallway inside was lit now. Paper lanterns glowing softly, stretching into endless depth. Along the walls stood figures, not moving,
Not speaking.
lined neatly in rows, facing inward toward the corridor. They were shaped like people, but their surfaces were smooth, like unpainted wooden statues. Where their faces should have been, there was only a shallow indentation. At the far end of the hallway stood the altar, and in front of it, a space exactly my height, empty, waiting. I woke up standing in my bedroom doorway. My feet were dirty with dried mud. The next morning, I went up the hill in daylight. The shrine doors were closed. The rope was pristine. The fox statues faced forward again. The offering box was empty. No coins. No plaque. I told myself I would resign from the association. But when I reached the bottom of the steps, I realized something that made my hands tremble. The town below looked slightly wrong. The houses were in the correct places. The streets curved as they should. But the windows, every window reflected the hill, not the sky, not the opposite buildings, just the shrine at the top. And in each reflection, I could see the honden doors standing open, even though behind me they were closed. It has been 3 weeks since then. I have not gone back, but every night at exactly the same time I hear it, not from outside, from inside the walls of my house. A slow, synchronized breathing. Inhaling, exhaling, as if something vast has settled beneath the town and is practicing the shape of us, waiting for the doors to open properly. When my sister stopped speaking, the doctors called it stress. She was 16. Final exams, club activities, the usual pressure. One afternoon, she came home from school, walked into her room, and didn't come out for dinner. By morning, she wouldn't answer when we spoke to her. Not silence in a dramatic way, just absence, as if words no longer reached her. She would sit upright on her bed, hands folded loosely in her lap, eyes open and calm. If you stood in front of her, she looked at you. If you waved a hand near her face, she blinked. But she didn't react, didn't follow, didn't seem to track you once you stepped aside. The doctor said she might be dissociating. Give her time, he told us gently. We gave her time. The first night I noticed something wrong. I was brushing my teeth when I heard my mother call my name from downstairs. Her voice was strained. Come here. My sister's room was at the end of the hallway. The sliding door was open. She was standing in the corner, not facing the wall, facing into it, her forehead almost touching the plaster. Her hands were still folded in front of her. How long has she been like that? I asked. My mother shook her head. I don't know. I went to check on her, and she wasn't in bed. We tried gently guiding her back. She resisted, not with strength but with weight, as if her body had decided the floor was more solid beneath that corner. Eventually, she let us move her. We laid her down again. She stared at the ceiling until morning. The next day, I skipped school to stay home. Around noon, I walked past her room and felt something shift in the air. Not a sound, not movement, just the sense that the space was occupied differently. She was standing in the opposite corner now. Same posture, facing in. There are 4 corners in that room. That night, she stood in a third. We moved her again. I started keeping track. Every time we turned our backs, she found a corner, always upright, always facing into it. By the end of the week, I realized something that made my stomach tighten. She was spending longer in each one, as if waiting. I began to avoid looking directly into the corners myself. There was a heaviness to them now, a depth that didn't belong to 90-degree angles and flat walls. One evening, I came home late. The house was quiet, too quiet. My parents' bedroom was empty. The lights were on. My sister's door was closed. I slid it open slowly. She was not in any corner. She stood in the center of the room, facing me, her expression unchanged, her eyes clear. For the first time in days, she moved first. She lifted one hand and pointed, not at me, past me, toward the hallway behind my back. I didn't want to look. I did anyway. The hallway stretched normally. Family photos on the wall. The bathroom door closed. But at the far end, where the ceiling met the walls above the stairs, something felt misaligned. The angle looked deeper. Not visibly open. Just wrong.
My sister made a small sound.
The first sound since this began. Not a word. A breath drawn in sharply through her teeth. I turned back to her. She was smiling. Not widely. Just slightly. As if relieved. Then she walked, calmly, steadily, past me into the hallway. I grabbed her wrist. Her skin was cold. She stopped, but her eyes remained fixed on the far end of the hall. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her other hand and pointed again. At the upper corner above the stairs. The light there seemed dimmer than the rest of the house. Not shadowed, just less present. A faint pressure built in my ears. "You don't need to stand there anymore," she whispered. Her voice sounded amused. Fragile.
Why?
I asked, my own voice shaking. "Because it's looking at you now." The overhead light flickered once. The corner above the stairs deepened. Not opening, not moving, just gaining a subtle sense of dimension. As if something inside it had leaned forward slightly. I felt an overwhelming urge to step into the nearest corner, to press my forehead against the wall, to give it my back. My sister's grip tightened unexpectedly around my wrist. "You have to keep facing it," she said softly. Her smile faded. "I'm tired." Behind her, in her bedroom, I heard a faint shifting sound. Not from the floor, from above. A quiet pressure along the ceiling, moving from one corner to another. Testing. Choosing. My sister let go of my wrist and stepped aside. Without breaking eye contact with the corner above the stairs, she walked backward into her room, into the corner nearest the door. Her posture returned to that same rigid stillness. Facing in, the pressure in the hallway intensified. The corner above the stairs darkened another shade. My vision blurred at the edges. Every instinct told me to turn away, to look at anything else. But I remembered what she said. "You have to keep facing it." Minutes passed. Or seconds. The house felt like it was holding its breath. The pressure shifted. Moved. Slowly across the ceiling. Testing each corner in turn. When it reached the one above my sister's room, she exhaled sharply. Her shoulders slumped. The darkened angle lingered there. Then, very gradually, it flattened, returning to an ordinary intersection of wall and ceiling. The pressure eased. The lights steadied. I ran to her. She was seated on the floor now, back against the wall, blinking slowly, confused. "Why am I on the floor?" she asked. Her voice was normal. Her eyes were tracking me properly. "It's been a month." She doesn't remember any of it. My parents don't talk about it. They say it was a phase. Stress. But sometimes, late at night, I feel the air change. A subtle weight shifting overhead. I don't check the time. I don't check my phone. I just sit upright in bed and stare at the corner where my ceiling meets the wall. And I keep staring. Because I know now, if no one is facing it, it starts looking for someone who will. When I was a child, my mother taught me never to answer if someone called my name from outside at night. "It might not be someone you know," she said. I grew up in a coastal town in Aomori where the houses sit close together, narrow streets running between them like cracks. At night, the wind carries voices strangely. You can hear conversations from blocks away, warped and directionless. Last winter, after my mother was hospitalized, I moved back into our old house to keep it from sitting empty. The first few nights were uneventful. The house smelled faintly of tatami and cold air. Pipes ticked softly after sunset. I slept in my old room on the second floor, facing the street. On the fourth night, I heard my name. It was just after midnight.
Soft.
almost polite, called from outside my window. I lay still, eyes open in the dark. The voice sounded exactly like my mother's, not strained like it had been in the hospital.
Clear.
Familiar. Haruto. A pause. Then again. Haruto. The window was closed, the curtains drawn. The voice was positioned directly beneath it. My body reacted before my thoughts did. I sat up slowly, heart pounding. My mother was in a hospital bed an hour away. The voice came a third time, slightly louder. Haruto. Open. The word choice was wrong.
My mother would never have said that.
I forced myself to lie back down and pull the blanket over my head, like a child. The voice did not repeat. In the morning, I checked the street. There were no footprints in the thin layer of frost. No sign anyone had stood below my window. That afternoon, I visited my mother. She was asleep when I arrived, her breathing shallow but steady. I sat beside her bed and listened to the hospital's quiet hum. After a few minutes, without opening her eyes, she spoke. Don't answer it. A cold feeling slid down my spine. Answer what? I asked carefully. Her eyes remained closed. If I call you at night, she murmured, don't answer. I waited for her to continue. She didn't. When she woke later, she didn't remember saying it. That night, I turned off my bedroom light and waited. I told myself I would confront it. Midnight passed. The wind moved softly through the street. At 12:17 a.m., my name came again, from outside. Haruto. The tone was slightly off this time. Still my mother's voice, but thinner, as if imitated. I approached the window slowly. Each step felt deliberate, heavy. The curtains swayed faintly, though the window was shut. Haruto. It said again, closer now. I'm cold. My throat tightened. The hospital room had been warm.
Bright.
Monitored. The voice outside sounded alone. Abandoned. My hand hovered near the curtain. Open. The word came softly, insistent. I remembered my mother's warning. Never answer if someone calls your name at night. Instead of pulling the curtain aside, I spoke quietly. You're not my mother. Silence. The air outside the window seemed to thicken. Then, after several seconds, the voice responded. You're right. It was still her voice, but now it carried no attempt at warmth. Only recognition. You sound like her, I said, forcing the words out. A faint sound followed. Not laughter. Not breathing. Something like a mouth trying to shape a smile. I practiced. The curtain lifted slightly from the bottom. Not from wind. From fingers. Pale shapes pressing lightly against the fabric from outside. There is no balcony outside my second-floor window.
No ledge to stand on.
The fingers pressed higher, indenting the cloth.
10 of them.
Then more, layered behind the first. I stepped back, pulse roaring in my ears. You have her voice, it continued calmly, but she doesn't need it anymore. The fingers traced the outline of the window pane slowly, as if mapping it. I can use it better. I grabbed the lamp from my desk and hurled it at the window. The glass shattered outward. Cold air flooded the room. The curtain fell limp. There was nothing outside. No body. No hands. Just the empty street below and the faint hum of distant traffic. My breathing came in short bursts. I stared down at the pavement. Then I saw it. Not on the street. On the side of the house. Clinging flat against the wall, just beneath my window. A shape the length of a person. Its limbs spread unnaturally wide. Fingers splayed into the siding. Its head tilted upward toward me. The face was in shadow. But the mouth was stretched too wide, as if pulled at the corners. And from it, in my mother's exact voice, it called again. Haruto. I stumbled back from the broken window. It did not climb in. It did not move closer. It simply remained there, affixed to the wall, staring up, waiting. I left the house before dawn. I have not returned. My mother passed quietly 2 days later. At the funeral, as relatives bowed and offered incense, I stood near the back, numb. When it was my turn to approach the altar, I leaned forward. The photograph of my mother smiled gently from within its frame. As I straightened, I heard it, very faint,
Close to my ear.
perfectly clear. Open.
I did not react.
I did not turn, but from the corner of my eye, I saw something move along the ceiling beams of the temple hall. A long shape, flattened against the wood, traveling from one shadow to the next, practicing her voice softly to itself,
Trying to get it right.
When I was in high school, my friend Kenta told me about the storage room behind his house. It wasn't a kara, not a proper one. Just a low wooden shed his grandfather had built decades ago, pressed up against the back fence where the bamboo grew thick. No windows. One sliding door with a rusted latch. "Don't go near it at night," Kenta said once, laughing like it was a joke. Grandpa used to say, "It's where things that don't leave properly end up." I thought he meant memories, regrets, that kind of thing. Years later, after Kenta moved to Tokyo and his grandfather passed, the house sat empty. His parents lived in an apartment closer to the city. They asked me, since I still lived nearby, if I could check on the property occasionally, air it out, make sure no one broke in. The first time I went alone, it was late afternoon. The house smelled closed off and dry. Dust clung to the edges of furniture. I opened windows, let the air move through. The shed out back looked smaller than I remembered. The bamboo had grown taller, leaning over it like something listening. I walked up to it without thinking. The sliding door was slightly open, just a few centimeters. I was certain it had always been kept shut. I stood there for a moment, hand hovering near the wood. There was no sound from inside. No animals. No wind. Just a stillness that felt contained. I slid the door, opened the rest of the way. The shed was empty. No tools. No boxes. Just a dirt floor and wooden beams. The interior was darker than it should have been for that hour, but I could see the back wall clearly. Nothing unusual. I closed it and went home. That night, I dreamed of the shed. In the dream, I was standing inside it. The door was closed behind me. There was no light source, but I could see the walls. They were closer than before. The space had narrowed. When I reached out to touch the wood, my hand met something softer. Not the wall.
Breath.
I woke with my hand pressed against my bedroom wall. The next week, I returned in the evening. I don't know why I chose that time. The sun had already set. The yard was dim, washed in that blue-gray light that flattens everything. The shed door was open again, wider this time. I felt irritation more than fear. Probably the wind, I told myself. I stepped closer. The bamboo behind it rustled faintly, though there was no breeze. The darkness inside the shed seemed thicker than the yard around it. Not black, just layered, as if depth had accumulated. I didn't enter. I stood at the threshold and peered in. The back wall looked farther away. That was the first thing I noticed. The shed was barely 2 meters deep. Now it looked longer. 3, maybe 4. It was subtle enough that I could doubt myself. I took one step inside. The dirt floor felt slightly damp beneath my shoes. The air was colder. I turned slowly in a circle. The walls seemed intact. But when I faced the door again, it looked smaller, more distant, as if I had walked deeper than a single step allowed. A faint sound came from behind me, a soft exhale. Not loud, not sudden, just close. I didn't spin around. I stood still. The sound came again, right behind my left shoulder. The space was too small for someone to stand there. I stepped forward quickly and turned. Nothing, just the far wall. But it was farther still. The shed had lengthened again. My breathing became shallow. I walked toward the door. It did not seem to approach. The wooden frame remained at the same distance, like a painting of an exit rather than an opening. Another exhale, this time directly at the back of my neck.
Warm.
I felt the distinct sensation of someone standing behind me, chest nearly touching my back, matching my posture. I could feel the outline of arms hanging at its sides, not touching, just aligning. The air in front of me trembled faintly. I understood then. The shed was not expanding.
It was accommodating.
making room for something that had stepped in after me. Very slowly, I stepped sideways. The warmth behind me shifted at the same time, staying aligned, as if unwilling to break contact. I spoke without thinking. "There's no room." The warmth paused. The air thickened. Then, gently, the pressure of my back increased. The dirt floor beneath my feet seemed to tilt forward. The door frame grew narrower. I had the sudden, overwhelming certainty that if I allowed myself to lean back even slightly, I would not be alone in my own outline anymore. With every bit of control I had, I stepped forward again. The warmth followed, still not touching. The door did not come closer. The shed had grown longer than it should physically be able to. I could no longer see the bamboo outside. Only darkness beyond the doorway. The exhale came again, this time from in front of me. I stopped. The warmth at my back did not. It pressed forward slightly, forcing my weight toward the center of the space. There was something ahead now, a faint density in the air, blocking the way. I was standing between two breaths, behind me and in front,
Perfectly aligned.
I realized what the shed was for. Not storing things, holding them, keeping them arranged in the shape they left, waiting for something with the right dimensions to step inside. "I'm not staying," I whispered. The pressure tightened. For a split second, I felt something slide partially over my shoulders, like fabric being draped, or skin being tested for fit. I lunged forward with everything I had. The door frame rushed toward me suddenly, as if the space snapped back into place. I stumbled out into the yard, falling onto the damp grass. The shed behind me was small again, 2 meters deep. The door fully open, empty. The bamboo was still. I slammed the door shut and pushed a heavy stone against it. The next day, I returned in daylight. The shed was gone, not destroyed, not collapsed.
Gone.
The fence ran straight where it had been. The bamboo grew undisturbed. There was no sign a structure had ever stood there. When I asked Kenta about it over the phone, he was quiet for a long time. Grandpa used to say, he finally replied, that the shed wasn't for keeping things in. I waited. It was for keeping something shaped like us from walking around unfinished. At night now, in my own apartment, I sometimes wake with the distinct feeling that there isn't quite enough room behind me in bed. That something is lying there, carefully aligned, breathing when I breathe, making sure it still fits. And that's the end of tonight's stories. If you made it this far, leave a comment and tell me where you listen from. It's always interesting to see how far these stories travel through the night. I'll be back soon with another tale. Until then, good night.